Well, let me start out with finishing up the last game because I probably, after watching the film, owe you an apology on how quickly I reacted to whether I would let the ball stay and not call a timeout. As I watched the film, I saw where we might have had numbers, but when I watched AP with 3 Michigan guys around him, I didn't want to lose the ball. So depending which way you were looking at it, that's the way I would address it. I'm very disappointed in the loss as I look back on it, because I did not think we did the things you need to do in a big game. And I'm disappointed that, we're kind of out of the conference race in the last week. But I'm kind of excited about the fact that as I look back over the year so far, we've won a lot of close games. We've done some things down the stretch that we haven't done in the last couple games, meaning we did perform down the stretch in a lot of those games. I thought we had one of our best weeks of practice before the Michigan game and did not necessarily translate all that into the game. I'm sure they had something to do with it. And yet I don't look at the 3-game losing streak any differently than I said last week when it was 2 games. Unfortunately, in the conference we're in, the schedule we've got, it all comes down to not when you lose games, but the games you lose are the games you lose, whether it's in the beginning, middle, or end. And I think even the NCAA has figured that out because they don't look at the last 10 games like they used to. So this becomes a big week for us for a lot of reasons. Conference tournaments starting around the country today. There's just no greater time than March, and we're into the conference tournaments already. We've got a big game with another ranked team on Thursday, and it's a game that could get us into the Friday play up in the conference tournament, which I think is important because there'll be some ranked team that's going to be playing on Thursday. And I think that's our first bit of business that we want to take care of, is make sure that we get back on a winning track, number one, and number two, that it helps us in the next goal we have, and that's to win the Big Ten Tournament Championship. And so it makes for a big week. As I looked at the players, Appling did struggle at the end, and we all know that, but I thought he did play better during the game. Not as good as he wants to or I'd like to. It didn't shoot as well, but as far as the other things he did, defensively what he did, I thought he was way more in tune than he was the 2 games before that. So after yesterday's practice, I see that growing. I don't see any issues there. So I don't know what else to tell you except that you can tell I am disappointed. But I'm disappointed because I want to be at a point where you're playing that last game for a Big Ten championship. So right now, maybe that's not going to happen. But we have a couple other goals that we still have in mind, and getting a Big Ten tournament championship, getting a higher seed in that, getting a higher seed in the NCAA is where we move on to. And to do that, you got a very tough game against Wisconsin that we have to take care of Thursday night. Yes, we're home. Students won't be here. But I think our players know how big the game is.
Tom, just kind of going back to that, I guess at this time of the year, can you readdress for people the philosophy of timeouts at the end of halves, at the end of, in those situations like that where you said maybe you do, maybe you don't?
Yeah, I mean, it's so per coach, and I really do get a kick out of everybody. I listen to it on TV. I get half of them say I would let it go, and then they let it go, and that same guy 2 weeks later is saying, why didn't he call timeout? It's the same guy. I mean, that's the advantage you guys get or they get. We kind of go with a philosophy. I saw someone didn't foul the other night, and we change our philosophy sometimes, but sometimes it depending who, where, what, and what's going on. And we talked about it beforehand that, if they missed a free throw, that's one of the reasons I'd called Keith over, if he got it, but there wasn't a lot of margin for error with 8 or 9 seconds left, And if you do watch on film, I mean, AP's got 3 guys around him, and I just wasn't taking that chance. Throughout my career, I probably called more timeouts at the end than not. In fact, I'd say it's 90-10. Been pretty successful. Ain't broke, why fix it? You know, everybody's got their own philosophy on it, and mine is I want my guys in the right place at the right time, and guess what? I called timeout and didn't get them in the right place at the right time, and that falls on me.
Tom, I've never heard of a team losing 3 straight and staying in the top 10, which is the compliment to your conference. But in a bottom line business, are losses losses? Is this team's confidence affected, and how badly do you need a winning feeling now?
Well, I think whenever you lose, you can lose to the number 1, 2, and 3 ranked team in the country, which we almost did in a row. I guess 1 and 4, but sure that affects you. You never feel good about a win, a loss. The sad part is, for a coach, sometimes you lose and played better than when you won. Everybody else feels better, but you don't feel better. I did not like the way we played against Ohio State. I thought we played pretty good against Indiana. I did not like the way we played against Ohio State in the second half. I did not like the way we played against Michigan in the second half. I'm sure both teams had something to do with it, But, you need a win. I mean, you need a win because you gotta start gaining some momentum, and that's the only way you gain momentum in this job is to win. So, we gotta win some games. But as I said, when you've been in it as long as I have, we've been beaten in the first round of the Big Ten tournament and went to a Final Four. When the roof was caving in, and so I'm going to stick to the principles that got me where I'm at, and realize that as disappointing as those losses are, as I said at the press conference the other day, if we would have thrown in a couple of teams in there that we would have beaten or did beat, and it just wasn't in succession, we wouldn't be saying that. I too was amazed that we stayed in the top 10, because I do the same thing I can criticize you guys for doing. I look at our team, I don't realize what the other teams are going through. In my office, we call it the Glenn Brown rule, my old college coach. You never know what's happening to these other teams. And some teams that I thought were better than us, Louisville, Syracuse, teams like that, lost 3 in a row, lost 4 out of 7. It's just the way it works right now with not only parity, but in this conference, it works that way because of a number of really, really good teams.
Tom, you mentioned how big this week is. Does it help at all, the focus at all, that they're off school this week, or do you change things a little bit this week at all?
What do I always tell you? If you win, I did it right. If you lose, I did it wrong. It's just simple. I don't like having this much time off. I mean, last week, we had 1 game in 11 days. This time of year, there's some good to it. You rest your guys. But what do you do? We're going to practice right after this, and then, you don't want your guys sitting around all day and all night either. And yet there's only so many things you can do, and you don't want them to get worn out. So it works both ways. If you won, it was great having the week off. If you lost, it's bad. I'm not that immature that I don't figure out that I'm stupid myself, and when I look at things. But this week, coming off that week, and now we got another week where we got 4 days to go. So we decided yesterday we just practiced completely on us. Today we'll put in some Wisconsin stuff, and tonight we might come back and shoot some free throws and do things. You want to keep them going, but you don't want to burn them out either, and that's a fine line to find. And I can't say I've been through many weeks like this in my career where you had the 7-day break, and then this is the earliest I think we've ever had spring break. Profs must want to get to Florida or something here a little earlier, because it's earlier than normal.
Tom, can you talk a little more about Keith being in tune? And there were a couple plays in the second half where he took the ball right at Michigan when you guys really needed a bucket. Is that what you're talking about a little bit?
Yeah, I thought he pushed it a lot more in the break. I thought he was much better there. I thought he did a much better job of, his defense was pretty good. If you look at that thing, Burke scored a couple points in the half court, but he scored most of his points in the open court, and those were off turnovers, and most of the time it wasn't his turnovers. So it wasn't where I wanted him to be, but he at least took a step in the right direction. And the way he's practiced, that step in the right direction, the way he practiced yesterday, I think he'll work his way out of it. I really do.
Tom, you mentioned yesterday that you still think that this team has the chance to go a long, long way. And in previous months, you've kind of said you really like the pieces, you really like that inside-outside game. Has anything changed in maybe over that month, or is it just the same thought that you have that this team has the pieces?
Well, when I say a long, long way, I mean, that can be a lot of things. I'm making a good run in the tournament. What is a good run anymore? I don't know. Used to be getting in was a good run. Winning a game was a good run. Getting out of the first weekend was a good run. Then Sweet 16 was a good run. And then Elite 8 was a good run. And it's moved up. But I think this team is capable of playing with just about anybody in the country that I've seen so far. Other years, I didn't feel that way. Even years we went to the Final Four, I didn't feel that way. I've just seen nobody out there. I mean, yeah, we played Kansas. It was so long ago. And we played that similar Gonzaga team last year, so at least I know something about them, although the center makes them better. When you look at some of these other teams, we played Louisville last year, I don't think anybody's that much better. The problem is I don't think anybody's that much worse, and I do look at this team that, we have showed up every game. Not always to our liking, but we haven't had one of those games where we just flat out haven't shown up. I mean, the schedule and the number of big teams we've played, that means we are getting up. Maybe not always at the right level, but we're getting up to a level just as much as anybody else is. And so I'm trying to look at that and keep it into perspective. And, we've played, I don't know what his stats are, 10, 11, 12 games against teams that were ranked in the top 10. So there's not that many other teams that we haven't played. And so we've played against everybody. Within 2-3 minutes a game, win or lose, we've been in every game. So I think that proves where we can be. Whether we have the leadership, which I think starts rearing its ugly head right now, the toughness, which I think rears its ugly head as competition gets tougher, as pressure gets bigger. Those are the things you need, and those two go together a little bit, because when you got a leader like Day-Day, he brought the toughness with him too, because he demanded of them. Coaches are demanding. I keep saying, it's not as good as if players are demanding. But we're assuming other teams have that. And I think less and less teams have some of those things right now. And that's what gives me hope and why I figure that we still are as good as most teams in the country. Can't say all because I haven't played against all of them, but the ones that we have, you can also get a look at the ones they've played, and if you try to make comparisons, I say it's never good, but it gives you some barometer. And put it this way, I'm not going to feel good on Selection Sunday unless Northern Michigan pops up on the other side of our thing, but I'm not going to feel bad if they got us seated and somebody says, you're a 4 seed or a 5 seed and you thought you'd be a 2, or you're a 2 seed and we thought you'd be a 5, or you're playing this team, oh boy, you're in this bracket against this team. I say, let's line it up, who cares? I mean, that's what I feel now. I'm going to feel the same way that night. Unfortunately, it's in a good way, but it's also in a bad way, that I don't think we're head and shoulders above anybody either.
So I'm kind of going back to a little bit of the timeout situation, and Keith, can you talk about the play where he got stripped? I mean, it looked like he was looking for you to decide whether there was going to be a timeout. In that instance, is that somewhere where he just needs to know that, or had you thought about calling a timeout right there?
I had 2 timeouts left, and what I've done a lot of times at the end of halves, and so maybe it was my fault that I didn't tell him, but I didn't want to call the timeout right away. They weren't pressing. He walked it up, and I'd like to get down to around 20 seconds so I could come up with something. And then if they trapped us, I had a time, or ball got loose, I had another timeout left. So I didn't want to call it with 35 seconds left and then have to hold it out there for 15 more seconds and then start something, because we were going to go for the last shot. It was either going to be win it or go into overtime. And so that was my philosophy and my thought process. And, hey, I don't care if he's looking at the bench or looking at, his girlfriend in the stands. I mean, that's happened once in a lifetime, and I haven't seen that happen very often, and it just did. Give Burke credit. He got a great steal. I don't think it was Keith's lack of laziness. He did look over at the thing, and then he started going away. So I don't blame that on anybody, and if I blamed it on anybody, it'd be me, because I could have called a timeout. But it sure wasn't him. It was a great play and a kind of a, if Keith had to do it over again, I'm sure he wouldn't turn the way he turned, but you got to give the play as much credit as you do the blame.
Any additional questions? We've got about 5 more minutes or so.
Jeez.
Tom, there's been a lot of talk about Keith and how you've had to try and get him through this. But the one person I'm wondering about, have you had to do the same things with Brandon Dawson lately? I mean, I know the injuries have been an issue, but
Brandon's been different than Keith because Brandon's been a little up and down, but he hasn't been where Keith was. Remember, we were canonizing Keith a month ago. He was a guy down the stretch. He's making the plays. He's taking the shots from Kansas on. He's making the free throws. So he's been there. I don't think Brandon's been there yet. I mean, he's at a 20-point game, but he hasn't been as consistent as Keith was for a while. I have a lot of disappointments because I think Brandon Dawson's got maybe one of the biggest upsides for us right now. But I just have no problem with his approach. I'm trying to figure out why we're finally getting the practices really good and why we're not translating that into a game. But I feel really good at where he's at as far as mentally, as far as where he's at, as far as knowing. I have not sensed any negatives in his mind. I think he's frustrated, as he's shown some. And, we're frustrated because we know he can give us a big lift. But, boy, last week in practice, he was as focused and prepared. Day of the shoot-around, even my staff said he was the best guy in the layup line. So he's coming. It's disappointing. It's frustrating, I'm sure, to fans, to me, to my staff. But I think it's most frustrating to him. And I haven't, been through it like that with an injury like that and a kid like that at that age. So I don't know what he's thinking inside, but I know he's still working his tail off. I think he's working harder now than he did 3 weeks ago. And I think that's a positive sign, if you can make it through the dog days, that's usually going to make you a better person, better player. And he's fighting through it. And I'm good with that. I really am.
Now, maybe this is a reach, but your Breslin crowds have been so good this year, maybe as good as in 5 years.
Yep.
And yet your students aren't here this week. I don't know how that plays out. If they still come to the games, are you concerned about that at all with students not on campus, that you'll get the same energy this Thursday?
Yeah, I am. 9 o'clock game, all the different things. You play in Wisconsin, who, it's a different kind of game. But, yeah, I'm concerned about it a little bit. I think our marketing people and our AD's been on top of it. I'm sure there's and some stayed around, but and I think they did at Michigan too, same scenario. Yeah, but I mean, I think it'll be it wasn't just our students that have done a better job. It's our regular fans have done a better job. I keep getting reminded by my wife of the 70, 80-year-old guy that was on the screen up there that was making more noise than most. So I kind of like that. It was good to have Judd back.
Tom, Derek only has a couple of these home games left, and was wondering if you feel that he senses maybe the urgency surrounding that, and also where he stands as, you mentioned the leadership issue earlier, how he's improved, in that regard.
Well, it's been interesting. You talk about who I'm worried about. I'm a little worried about him because I think reality is setting in like it does with every senior, The other day, I was surprised. I thought he was kind of unemotional for a big game in his state and everything. But I think that, you preach to every senior, to every freshman, sophomore, and junior, you're going to be a senior before you know it. Take advantage of every day. And they don't do anything different than we didn't do. And, a couple times in the last week, he said to me, yesterday we got together before practice, and I said, we got these 2 games, and it's going to mean a lot also for the Big Ten tournament, the seeding there, the day you play, all this and that. And he looks up and he says, Big Ten tournament? I said, yeah, it starts next week. Honest to God, there was a look on his face that, holy, cow, I guess I'd say here. But I almost started laughing. And I pulled him aside after, and I said, he goes, that means it's almost over. I said, yeah, that's what it means. And he was so sincere the way he said it, I almost felt bad. And I couldn't laugh about it. I couldn't cry about it. I just had to sit there and say, yeah, I told you this is what happens, it comes. And I think a lot of guys go through that. I think he realized about a week ago that, it gets to this point in time, and for the first time in your life, you got to say, what am I going to do? Up until then, when you commit to a college and you're still in high school, you know what you're going to do when you finish. In 8th grade, most guys know what they're going to do when they get done, unless you got to go back to 8th grade, But everybody goes through this thing. I went through it, and so I sat down and told them what I went through, and yeah, I'm concerned about it. I think in the leadership spot, you'll take it as a negative when I say we don't have what I would consider great leadership. It's not as negative as I'm saying it. It's just a fact of life. It's not in the personality of the guys I got, and usually, where Keith was making little strides for a while there, and maybe Bird was making some strides. Every guy has done something good. But, boy, you got to be one of the better players that's playing all the time and have your game together to be a good leader, too. So if your personality isn't that, and maybe all those other things are on your side, you become better. If your personality isn't that and then you're struggling yourself, that's even harder. I've said it, and I'll continue to say it. The chemistry has been great. I got no issues. I got a bunch of guys that get along. They do things together. They've been great. But having somebody will take the bull by the horns in a timeout or on the court when they walk back out, or we're lacking a little bit of that. I just keep asking other coaches who's got it. I don't get a lot of I got it. I get a lot more question marks. It just, we're coming off one of the best we ever had, and so it makes it, I think, compounds the problem. A little bit.
Tom, kind of going along with that, how much more realistically can Appling give you in that sense?
Lots.
And
just in the leadership?
Yeah, in the leadership, and then just also, how much does it hurt when he's struggling over these last 3 losses, when he's been kind of that consistent closer that you talked about earlier?
Well, I think that part hurts a lot more. The leadership part, he's not going to wake up in the morning and be, some guy that, magpie. That's not going to happen. But I think he's got to, we've resided ourselves the fact that I said for months, I got to get some rotation. I got to get this. And then a couple weeks ago I said, hey, you know what? We are what we are. And I got to deal with that part. And about 3 weeks ago, I figured we are what we are. And about 3 weeks ago, I figured the same with our leadership. It's not going to get that much better. So, there's a lot of ways you still can win games. And that's the way I'm looking at it. Keith Appling's got a lot to give yet in the other aspect. As a player, he's going to start making some shots. And if he does, that's going to take something off him. He is a very good defender. He is a guy that can get it from point A to point B as fast as a lot of people. Not everybody, but a lot of people. And I think he's got a lot to give that he can start giving Thursday night and he can go right through the tournament. I do have faith in him. We haven't liked the inconsistencies. But I do remember having the same conversation last year, when people wanted me to move them all over and do this and that. He ended up having a pretty good year. And so a little disappointed in maybe what's happened, but everybody handles pressure differently too, and maybe that was a struggle. Did you have one more?
Right here. Tom, it'll be 16 straight tournaments for you guys for this year. During that period, can you ever recall that there's been more pressure on an individual conference to do well in the tournament as there is for you guys right now in the Big Ten?
No, not in my 16 years of getting there. I can't remember that there was more pressure on the entire conference. But I don't put as much pressure on that, just like the ACC tournament. And the reason I don't is because I still think that this tournament coming up is all about matchups. Some teams you match up well with, some teams you don't. I don't think it necessarily mandates. I mean, we do in society, we're kind of been on the upper hand of the ACC Big Ten Challenge, but right away that got flipped. When it was the ACC, Dick was flipping it one way, but when it was us, it got flipped the other way. And now we have to win a national championship to surpass them. And they got a great league, and we got a great league. But I think it's been so built up all year that there's a little more pressure. And but I think deservingly built up. I mean, I think the proof's in the pudding. The league is the best, and top to bottom, there's no question. So hopefully we can all do our part. It got to be in the Big Ten Challenge. You never pulled for your rivals. You never did this. You never did that. Then all of a sudden everybody's pulling for everyone because we were catching so much. Let's hope we have a Final Four with 4 Big Ten teams. They'll probably still find a reason why it's not as good, but I think that would be great. And there is going to be some pressure, but there's some exciting parts to it too. I mean, somewhere along the line, we really don't think about it this way. So Michigan's been in the top 5 90% of the year, top 7 almost all of it. Indiana's been in the top 5 the entire year. Ohio State's been half the year in it. We've spent half the year in the top 10. And yet I think we always think because we've lost some games, meaning we, the league, that there's other conferences that are, all of a sudden better or catching us. When Duke was Duke and Carolina and the rest of the teams weren't very good, they didn't lose 3-4 games, partially because they're real good, partially because the conferences, I think, aren't as good or weren't as good. I remember when we won it one year when we were 15-1, I think we played against one other ranked team in our league. And maybe only a couple other ranked teams because of our non-conference. I mean, now we played, 11 in the top 10 at one time? I mean, it's just so different. It's hard to put perspective on it. But I know this. We have a big game Thursday, and we do got to get on the winning track, and it's not an easy team to do that against. I do know that we are not going to be afraid of anybody because we've played everybody. I mean, when you look at even the rankings right now, I don't know where Miami is. I don't know. We haven't played at Duke, and we haven't played Gonzaga. Other than that, it seems like we've played some people that have played just about everybody that's in there. So I think the pressure on us is we're as good as a lot of teams, but so is Michigan, so is Indiana, so is Duke. I mean, there's a lot of good teams out there, and I don't think there's any great teams. So, last one.
I was just going to squeeze in a Wisconsin question about,
Yeah.
ending this 4-game ranked stretch with a real nice, easy non-conference game.
Yeah, ending the 4-game stretch, and they've got, those 3 seniors that have played a lot. I don't know what happened the other day. I've watched it on film. I watched the beginning of it before I went to our game. It was a little strange, but they still are a Wisconsin team that has some characteristics of the Wisconsin teams. They're still very good defensively. They run you off the 3-point line, which shouldn't affect us much, but they do that. But they don't shoot it as well from the free throw line. That's odd for a Wisconsin team. They've been sporadic from the 3, and in that game they didn't make many at all. And they're taking maybe even more than they've taken most years. So it's going to be It's never not been a tough game. It seems like every game we play against them is a tough game, and I'm sure this will be the same. But hopefully we're going to find a way to get on the right side of the score and see what happens. But we do have a interesting week ahead of us, and being spring break, I know we'll be prepared to play. I just want to make sure that we're prepared. We play the way we're prepared, and I didn't think we did that as well against Michigan as that we needed to do.